Welcome to the Luke Macias Show. Last month, Governor Greg Abbott announced his re-election campaign, and in doing so, he rolled out a very aggressive property tax plan. At the time, I think this is maybe 4 episodes ago, I overviewed this plan in detail. So if you want to go back a couple episodes, I explained Governor Abbott's property tax plan that he has. It is a more aggressive property tax plan than I've seen any of the big three, the Speaker, Lieutenant Governor, push out, present, and champion during my time in Texas politics. And so I overview that, explain it in a lot more detail than Governor Abbott and I go through today. But I asked the governor's team if he'd be willing to sit down and discuss this plan, and they agreed. So today we bring you a conversation that I had with Governor Greg Abbott. Let's go to the conversation. Governor, thank you so much for sitting down with us today.
Hey, great to have you here.
Let's talk about property taxes.
Sure.
It has literally been talked about every year I've been in Texas, but you have rolled out what I would describe as the most aggressive property tax plan that any member of the big three has ever rolled out. Can you tell me why you decided this year to make this a bit of a pillar of your reelection campaign and next session?
So property taxes is an issue that we've been working on, I think every session I've been governor. But most prolifically, if you go back to the 2019 session, the 2023 session, and then this last session, we did more than ever before to try to move the needle on property taxes, whether it be completely reforming the system like we did in 2019 or dramatically increasing the homestead exemption in 2023 and then again in 2025. But as I've traveled around the state, I've talked to literally tens of thousands of Texans, and they all tell me that what we've done hasn't moved the needle for them. Their property taxes are still going up, and they demanded more changes. And in my conversations with them, they outline this issue or that issue. And if you look at the plan that I put together, it is the product of having all these visits with tens of thousands of Texans, knowing that what I'm articulating now, what I'm seeking to get past this next session, will move the needle in a way where Texans are going to truly feel property tax relief. As a quick recap, one thing we have to do, the only reason why property taxes go up in the first place is because of increased spending of property taxing entities.
Yes, sir.
We have to control and contain that spending. Second is property taxes go up without citizens even having a say in it. That's why I want to make sure that not only will every property tax increase require a vote by the public, but a vote getting 2/3 vote to make sure that we're not going to have any, whimsical property tax increase every single year. Another thing that we want to see done is to empower the people to control their own property taxes. And the way we do that is to give them the ability to petition to roll back their property tax rates. Maybe the thing I hear the most would be the following 2 things. One is that people, when they get their appraisal in an envelope, their hands are literally shaking because they're afraid to open up the bill, knowing the size of the increase in their appraisal, knowing and fearing they're not going to be able to live in their home. And we have to do more to contain the appraisals. And hence, what I came up with is right now, by law, appraisals can go up 10% a year. I want to reduce that to 3% a year. On that regard, I want to point out something because a lot of people wonder, that sounds like California, whatever the case may be. That number actually was pulled from Florida. Florida has had the 3% appraisal cap in place for more than 20 years. And Florida is a robust economy and a robust state where people are able to buy and sell homes very easily. And so the 3% appraisal cap is not going to destroy the market. One other thing about appraisals, and that is people should not be getting their home reappraised every single year and having to deal with it and protest it, all that kind of stuff so frequently. So I want the appraisals to be done only once every 5 years as opposed to every year. And then the last thing, which is the big thing, we have to stop nibbling around the edges. We need to do something that we are capable of doing, and that is to completely abolish the largest part of your property tax bill, which is the school district property tax. We can completely abolish that with the state providing the funding to our public schools that would be missing because of the elimination of the school district property tax. And we can do that without raising any other tax.
Let's talk about the relief part first, because you have this relief portion, and then the bulk of it is all of these reforms to make sure that the relief lasts. Recently, it came out that the average homeowner, right now, the average new first-time home buyer is now over 40 years old. And just 5 years ago, that was 33. So it seems like you have really honed in the relief portion to the most painful part of the property tax, which is homeownership. What made you decide to focus on getting people into a first-time home? Because the average, the relief you're talking about does more than a 1-point reduction in the interest rate on somebody's mortgage when it comes to their mortgage.
Correct. So there are actually two goals to this, one of which you mentioned, and that is by abolishing the school district property tax. For one, that will be lasting, enduring relief forever, and make it so that everybody who owns a home is going to be able to stay in their home, because it will eliminate more than half of their property tax bill. But it does exactly what we're talking about, and that is, we need to make sure that buying a house is going to be more affordable for the younger generation, not just seniors, but you could be in your 20s or 30s or 40s, and be able to buy a house, to go through the way the process works. If you buy a house, you have to look at how much your mortgage is going to cost and how much you got to pay in property taxes, and look at your monthly income, and are you going to be able to afford to be able to pay that bill? And if we are able to slash the property tax bill in half, that's going to save hundreds of dollars a month in the monthly payment for someone in their 30s who want to buy a home to begin with. And so what my proposal does more than any other proposal, it ensures that the younger generation, the young adults, they too are going to finally be able to buy a home that's going to be affordable in the first payment, but also allowing them to stay in their home as long as they want to.
When it comes to reform, I think of the bond passage rate you talked about. My own school district just had like 6 individual bonds. 2 of them failed, 4 of them passed, but the 4 that passed only had 52% of the vote. And so it seems like you're making these local governments actually focus on taking out, borrowing money for things that the entire community is going to have consensus on. Is that one of the goals behind that?
It's 2 goals. One is to ensure that the local governments that impose property taxes, and by the way, to be clear, the state does not impose a property tax. It's only local governments that do that. But whenever the local governments seek to increase property tax rates, they need to be able to show that it's for an essential purpose, and a purpose that everybody in the community can agree upon, which is why the 2/3 rule is important. But going along with that, the reality is all of these local governments are spending way too much money, many of which are on leftist ideological programs or things that are not the bread and butter issues. They need to spend their money on law enforcement, on fire, on water, on the core needs of the community, as opposed to pursuing ideological ends that are just costing the taxpayers more money. And by having this 2/3 requirement to vote on every property tax increase is going to ensure that citizens are getting the services they actually need, but maybe shedding the leftist ideology that they don't.
Often, places like Austin get talked about, Harris County, Dallas County, these larger counties. But you mentioned talking to tens of thousands of Texans, and some of those are in rural parts of the state. And so your plan that you've rolled out, is it a statewide plan that applies to all Texans that are feeling this property tax pinch?
My plan is statewide. Doesn't matter if you're in Canadian Texas, which, by the way, is at the tip top of the panhandle, or in Harlingen, Texas, Texarkana, or El Paso, but also all those small communities in between. Because I've been in every region of the state, talked to Texans in every region of the state. And for one, they're demanding property tax relief. For another, they explain to me why and how they need that relief. And it's important to understand that rural Texans are demanding property tax relief as much as they are in suburban and urban areas. The reality is that all Texans need housing affordability so they can stay in their home. And to deliver that housing affordability, my plan achieves that more than any other plan that's ever been constructed for the state of Texas.
Back in 2017, you rolled out a bunch of conservative agenda items. You've done this several times now during your tenure, where you'll bring the legislature back for a special session and say, here's a lot of good Republican policy that y'all didn't get to. And you had a bill that you were pushing that would stop taxpayers from funding the collection of union dues that national liberal unions use to collect all this money and then spend all across the country. A lot of people haven't prioritized that since 2017. It did not pass that session. But it did pass the Senate this last session. I feel like China land, school choice, some of these major pillar conservative policies that you've championed and pushed across the finish line, put Republicans in a position to maybe focus on that and some other policies. What's your position on that? And then also maybe some other Republican policies that you think we'll have an opportunity to get to next session.
Why in the world are we using taxpayer money to pay lobbyists? As you know, oftentimes taxpayer money is being used to pay lobbyists who are seeking to increase property taxes or increase other taxes or increase spending. We're working against ourselves by doing that. And that's one reason why I put it on the special session agenda earlier this year. It's another reason why it's going to come up again this next session. We did get closer than we've ever gotten to passing it this past special session. I think that people and members of the legislature in the Capitol are understanding this is a priority that we have to get passed. But more than that, this is just common sense governance. And so it should be an easy policy to pass. And if you would, it's just like other common sense principles that we pass. It's common sense that boys shouldn't participate in girls' sports. You know what I mean? It's common sense to have a secure border, whatever the case may be. And so what we are actually doing and achieving for ensuring that we inject a heavy dose of common sense instead of Texas governance.
Wherever you happen to be, thanks for spending part of your day here with the Texas Minute. It's a beautiful day in the Lone Star State. There's a new battle on the horizon in the legislature for taxpayers eager to see their property taxes reduced. Some school districts are making it harder for Texans to find out what's happening in those classrooms and libraries. Texas lawmakers are already poised to make big decisions.
Bye, honey. I'll see you tonight.
Poised to make big decisions impacting your family and your pocketbook. In other news, polling finds that California is moving to the Lone Star.
When you came in, your background was that of a judge, of an executive and attorney general, and my observation from 2015, your first session, to now is that it seems like as time's gone on, you and your office have become more and more involved in the actual legislative process. What would be your view of how you've learned in the governorship to engage in the legislative process more actively and shape policy in a way that you think reflects what people are asking you to do?
Yeah. A couple of things about that. Let's go back to being a judge. Being a judge means listening to both sides and then making a decision about what is the right thing to do. Let's go back to your earlier question, and that is, I listened to the people of the state of Texas about property taxes, and I learned that what we were doing was actually not helping them with their property taxes, and hence we needed to take a different path. In other words, after seeing all the evidence, what we were doing was the wrong approach to addressing property taxes, and hence the need for this new property tax proposal. But when you look across the board, there were certain very important issues that were needed to be addressed in the state, where the state was, let's say, behind some other states, like in school choice, for example. And that there are occasions when the governor simply needs to step in, use the political capital that I have gained, and make sure that we get issues across the finish line. And there are issues like that that arise in session after session where I have to be the one who will make sure that I move the needle to get legislation passed.
Last question. When you launched your campaign, I was 23 years old. And after you're reelected at the end of this next term, I'll be 40. I think school choice, I say breaking the back of the teacher unions, is probably the thing you'll be most remembered for in this term. Property taxes is clearly one of the pillars. But what are other things you want to be remembered for in this next 4 years as governor?
Listen, there's going to be several things that I'm going to be remembered for. One is to ensure that we take the education reform that we passed during this past session that provides the largest day one school choice program in the United States. And remember, that is an end unto itself to make sure that parents are going to be able to choose the education pathway that's best for their child. However, it's also a means to an end that I want to achieve. Texas is ranked number one in so many categories. I want to make sure that we are ranked number one in educating our children. And when you combine school choice with teacher pay raise to ensure we attract and keep the best teachers, when you look at the curriculum reform that has purged all this leftist ideology, the wokeism, the DEI in our schools, and return students to the fundamentals, reading and writing, and math and science, we will be on a pathway to ranking number one in education. Another thing is Texas must remain the number one state in America for economic opportunity, for the most jobs. There was a new report that came out earlier this week showing that, once again, Texas ranked number one in America for the most new jobs. That economic prosperity is important to make sure that people are going to be able to get and keep good paying jobs that will put more money into their pockets. So we got education, we have the economy. We have to pass this property tax reform that will truly make Texas the most affordable state in the United States. And then another thing for which I'm already known for that we must take steps again to ensure, and that is I've done more than any governor in the history of America to secure our border. And we need to understand that is something that's not going away. We now have a president that we're able to work with as opposed to work against. But during this next term, Trump is no longer going to be president at the end of it. And so we have to be prepared during this coming session to make sure that we're taking the actions and the steps that are needed to ensure lasting security on our border.
Governor, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Good to see you.
Thank you. I hope that 20, 30, 40 years from now, one of the things that many of us can tell our children and maybe our grandchildren at the time that we were able to accomplish was property tax elimination. And in order to do so, we're going to have to ensure that we begin having real fiscal discipline at a local and state level, that we reform the current system to be able to even make that happen. What I think Governor Abbott's plan does, if you did go back and listen to my very detailed explanation of it, but also I think if you hear some of what he's talking about in this conversation, is first of all, creates a framework that puts guardrails on the current system and makes sure that these ever-increasing bills that you're experiencing stop. It then takes a real bite out of the biggest problem. We need to admit that for most Texans, they own one piece of property. For most of them, it's one piece of property. And if we can eliminate the property tax, the M&O property tax portion of that one property they own, it is a massive accomplishment. This is not a small plan. This is not nibbling around the edges. This is an aggressive, bold plan that takes a huge chunk of people's current property tax bills and eliminates it entirely. So we should applaud the governor for putting that forth and his reforms that make it very, 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 very hard for these local governments to keep eating away. Y'all are worried. I know you're worried when you get that property tax bill in the mail. You wonder, what did my appraisal do this year? How screwed am I going to be? You have to go down and protest it again and again and again and again. And imagine if in Texas, you opened that appraisal and you felt the same way people in Florida or Tennessee feel. They don't fret. His plan will do that even for your non-homesteaded property. I own a duplex in San Antonio. Now, I'm a big fan of homestead exemptions. I've talked about that in detail on the show. I think it's the most important thing. And I appreciate what the governor said about how his plan helps young families get into their first home. Guys, we should want as many Texans as possible to buy their first home that are currently not homeowners. Charlie Kirk actually talked about this in what I think was one of his best conversations he had in the year before he died. In one of his interviews, he talked about the problem that we have a generation of people that don't own anything. It is a major societal problem that we need to recognize as such. We want them to own something because when you own something, you own a part of America. It's not an idea. It's a physical piece of land that you call your own. And it changes the way you think. It's the same way that women voters become a lot more conservative when they get married because they have a family. They become even more conservative when they have a child because they're now a mother. Young Texans become more conservative when they purchase a home because they're now an owner. They own something of value. For many Texans, it's the only thing they're going to pass on to their children. Their net worth that they will hand to the next generation is going to be their home. Maybe they have a little in the 401k. Maybe they have a little savings account they can give. If we don't help people get into that status and state, we're doing ourselves a disservice. You don't want to live in this state filled with renters. You want people to have a path to homeownership. I really, really appreciate his willingness to say, hey, that's part of my plan. And I think that he's the only one who's put something out that really focuses on that. There's a lot going on in Texas. And the year's kind of ending. Campaigns are going to start kicking off more and more and more. You'll start seeing more signs pop up around and text messages and things like that. And we have a lot to discuss as time goes on. But I wanted to come to y'all before Christmas and just give you this conversation. I'm grateful that the governor was willing to sit down and begin the conversation. It will be an ongoing conversation. We will be talking about this when you go to the ballot box in March and vote on whether or not you want to continue to fight to eliminate property taxes. We're going to talk about it during the Republican State Convention, where I think many of you are going to come and put property taxes as a legislative priority in the Republican platform and on our legislative priorities. We're going to talk about it in November when it's a contrast between Republicans and Democrats. And the vision we're giving people in Texas is if you elect Republicans in the Texas House and the Texas Senate, in the governorship, statewide across the board, we will eliminate your personal homesteaded property tax for M&O. The largest line item on your bill will get eliminated. I think that's compelling. And then we will talk about it in 2027 when the session starts. And like school choice was last year, I think this is going to be a policy that will and should move quickly. And that discussion should be had early in the legislative session. So this conversation and the episode I did 4 weeks ago marks the beginning of what will be probably the largest policy conversation we are going to have in Texas for the next year and a half. I hope you learned something today, and I hope you do have a very Merry Christmas.